And most movements for national liberation are like this. Like the Algerian one was the same as well. Other issues in society get subsumed under the kind of the bigger cause. But the reason I bring this up is because our role here, what we're trying to do today, is sort of deconstruct or think about, you know, what's presented to us as the norm or as normal, and then see what is underneath that. Like, what are we missing? You know, when we're constantly bombarded by the same image. And the same discourse, the same political discourse, like you're saying, like the same ideologies or fighting ideologies, or it's all important in the bigger struggle. It's all very, very important. But then, how does hegemony then work in the household, for example, or on the streets, or male-female relationships? Then how do they play out underneath? What are some of the other problems to do with social structures and economic structure in the camp that somehow get elided? They get blurry, they get hazy in this setup. But there's something else I wanted to discuss with you guys, and it's I tried to find images of the first Intifada, the graffiti of the first Intifada online, and I couldn't, funnily enough. It was very difficult for me to find some. But obviously this is normal. This is because, this was way back in the, 89, in the early 90s, 87, 88, 89, early 90s. That would be great at some point, and then we can meet again and discuss this. But I'm curious in discussing with you and your opinions on this, is what is the difference in some of what you imagine of the graffiti in the first Intifada, or what you know about it, and some of which is not very different from this sort of writing on the walls, like this. And an additional layer, I think, during the first Intifada, from what I understand, but you correct me if I'm wrong, is the idea that political factions spoke to each other. The messages were coded about action, about mobilization, about what to do tomorrow. It was an idea of subverting Israel, or Israel's ability to control the streets was thwarted, was limited by this writing on the wall. So it actually had a political purpose, a mobilizational purpose. And then when you compare these sorts of writings, internal camp wall writings, with the wall and what we know of what's going on the wall and all these images that we see on the wall, so much of what we have within our camps is in Arabic and the rest is in English. Different peoples work on the graffiti. For example, this graffiti. Does anyone know who did this? No, this is Hay Gaza. But this one, for example, where is this? Haida. Yeah, and who would have done this? مركز لاجئ عملها. Interesting. Okay, for example, there's this, and now when we compare to these images, okay, hi Kaman, where is this? Is this here? مين قال? I think I forget. I should have put. مين قال؟ مش سامع. هاي إلك عندكم؟ لا مش دار أمين ها؟ هاي. Anyway, but okay, the idea is when we compare these images, okay, or the aesthetics of these ones with this, they're very different. This, captivating. What is it? Who's this captivating? What does it mean to captivate? مين بيعرف زي ما بعرف شو الترجمة إلها بس شو يعني هيك شيء to capture إيش يعني شو إيه لا مش محاصر captivate لا مش control هو حدا هون إيه to capture لا هيك تجذبه بركن تجذبه okay so هذا بالإنجليزي okay we will win هذا captivating Guernica. Okay, so let's move on now. And I want to talk a bit about this idea, and I'll bore you again with a bit more theory, and then we can discuss it again through images. Let's move this. Okay. So about the performance of affect and the notion of emancipation, what we began with. When I told you that performance of affect means like to be able to move someone's emotions, someone's sensations, it happens especially when you're amongst a big group of people, in public spaces, in demonstrations, etc. or through looking at a beautiful piece of artwork, for example. Now in thinking about this, there's a very relevant French radical social historian and philosopher. His name is Jacques Rancière. I normally like him. Sometimes I have a problem with what he says, but importantly for us, or relevant to us here, he writes on the notion or the idea of visuality, or the visual, and its relationship to emancipation, how we can be emancipated and feel free in ways that challenge some of our most fundamental understandings of what constitutes politics and the political. Okay, so let's say political action and versus power structures. For this theorist, who is again also on your key readings list, the basis of emancipation lies in two concepts. The first is the notion or the idea of the community of equals. So everybody starts from the same point, that they are equal. They're equal even if they don't have the same education. They're equal if they don't have the same social background. They are simply equal as human beings. And the second is the idea of the disruption of the senses. So our senses being our eyes, nose, smell, and how it's important to sometimes disrupt the way our senses behave, or the way our senses see things, or smell things, or hear things, and I'll try and explain both a bit further. Okay. So in contrast to the first definition I gave you, politics for Rancière is the struggle of an unrecognized party for equal recognition in the established hegemonic order. He calls the established hegemonic order the police. But for him, an unrecognized party for equal recognition could be women, could be refugees, could be immigrants. They're not recognized in the established order. Or if they're recognized, they're not really in terms of actions, in terms of policies towards them. I think a very good case would probably be the refugees or the immigrants, newly arrived immigrants in Europe. So aesthetics, he says, or al-jamaliyat, is intrinsic to the battle of getting ourselves, unrecognized people, to become recognized. Aesthetics, let's say, well, for us, aesthetics for us here is like in terms of the visual production through an image, through an artwork, etc., is intrinsic to the battle of getting recognized, because he argues the tension it involves is essentially about the image of society, and in particular about what is determined by the established power structures as possible to act out, to express, and to represent. So for Rancière, politics is happening when the unrepresented segments of society, such as women, youth, refugees, immigrants, migrants, seek to disrupt the order of domination, and which is the distribution of the sensible. Sorry, I confused here. For Rancière, the arts then are so central to this battle for recognition because they take on the task of reorganizing people and society's accepted perceptions of society. So I'll explain it quickly again. So if you've got power structures that decide for us how we are to see things, I think the good example is again what you were talking about, the visuals on the wall. There's someone there is a hegemony there. The hegemony in this case could be, dominant political ideologies in the camps or discourses. They are fighting a bigger enemy, which is Israel, but they're also a hegemony within the camp. So when people resist, so they decide for us what it is that we should see, how we should see it, what we should think about it, through an active effort to construct the reality for us. So this guy, Rancière, this theoretician, says that the visuals plays an important role in disrupting this. So if you decide it could be through graffiti or counter graffiti, or a performance art on the street, or it could be any of these things. They disrupt the reality around us. So if we're used to every day, I can't remember which one of you said that you come out of the camp every day, you see the same thing on the street, and you think the same thing, and it's getting a bit boring. So imagine you see someone, I don't know, a clown dressed up the next day. Okay, and then the clown unleashes a capacity in your thinking. It unleashes a way of thinking that's not tied up to the way you've been organized to think, or you've been programmed to think. Okay, so following from his line of argument, the political in art or artistic production is not in the messages and feelings it transmits about the state of the world, nor is it political because of the way it represents social structures, conflicts, or identity. Rather, art is political because it has the ability to propose new ways of reorganizing the space we are designated by power structures. challenging the forms and systems of authorized discourse, significations, and meanings of our world, defined and policed by formal politics. Okay? You're all following? Yeah? Okay. So politics, according to this understanding, then revolves around what is seen and what can be said about it, around who has the ability to see, the talent to speak, and the right to speak, around ways of doing and making as a shared sense of the common or the collective. So for Rancière, then, the politics and aesthetics lies primarily in the potential to disrupt and antagonize the recognized order. Yeah? Okay, and I just want to look at two cases here and one, we'll start with the Arab Spring. So, I don't have an image of, well, before this public, Tahrir, for example. What did we know about Tahrir before Tahrir?
All the governmental departments.
Huh?
The governmental departments.
What else? Like who? Yeah.
It's mentioned many times in Adil Imam movies.
It's mentioned many times in Adil Imam films. Yeah, that's important, and also the fact that you felt a governmental presence. It was not a space for the people. I mean, what shocked the world about this image? Not forget the world, at least Arabs between themselves. Why was this so shocking for us?
The spirit that were existing there. How all these millions of people, one hand, and asking for the same thing, and they were very organized without any government or without any organization.
Exactly. But
the first time the public was create the common place.
Exactly. Exactly. This is very important. Like, it completely shifted our own perception of our own public space. Like what you were saying, like when I told you, what if the clown comes out tomorrow in the camp, and he stands there or she stands there as a clown and, I don't know, does something or whatever. This will be completely disrupt the way we see things. And what this actually meant, I mean, I know we've all spoken, changed the way people see each other and the respect they have for each other. I mean, at least, I teach in a Western academic institution, and what we're always trying to fight is the idea of the Arab as lazy, as somehow sitting on the side of the street, not an active political agent, a victim, which we can only understand through either Islamic politics or, corrupt secular regimes. But the citizen didn't actually mean anything. And this is the first time it disrupts this image, not just for the people involved, but for Arabs in other countries and the Western, so-called Western world looking upon it. So it's very powerful because it disrupts this image that we have of each other. Look at this one. This is a good one. Kaman Tahrir, prayer.
So this is the first Friday. This is the first Friday, the first million.
But when you see this image, like, do you just pass by it and you think, oh, it's not? Well, do you look closely, like, what is this? Or
I think not all of this people are religious.
This is the first.
It's a kind of participation.
Exactly. It doesn't really matter in the end, does it? Whether it's
like, you would be amazed that among those people praying, they were communists, socialists.
Yeah.
But the idea was to gather there and occupy the place.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter whether you pray or not. Just come there and do this.
Yeah.
So you reclaim the space.
Yeah.
It was the first million they called for.
Yeah. So this is another image, like what we also did to the public space, which is fine, I mean, temporarily.
By the way, the images you are showing actually is taken by a Reuters cameraman.
These ones are? Okay.
Yeah, and he's Palestinian.
Actually, this was the BBC. I think this was the BBC website. I'm not sure
if
but
they were taken...
But through the Reuters...
his name, no, not Mustafa, Muhammad al-Sha'ir. He's from Bethlehem.
Okay.
He was in...
I'm glad then that's the... Okay. Yeah, because, there's so many images, and I had trouble, like, deciding what to choose and what... I mean, we could do this for hours and days and months, but so anyway, so this is another one. Which also I think is disruptive of the idea of what a person of this age, like probably he's around the same age as many of you guys, like what his role is. Like this image is very common for people, but if we were to place it in a context, it would be Palestine, right? Maybe even Lebanon sometimes. Huh? Yes, this is but this is not Palestine. This is Egypt. So.
Actually, many of the Egyptians, the youth, they said many of the tactics they used in countering the Egyptian police and riot police were actually the same.
Yeah.
They depended on the tactics that Palestinian youth uses in demonstrations in Palestine against the Israeli military and the border forces. So that, like, when you talk to them over Facebook and like on the internet, when you talk to friends there, they say like most of the tactics they learn how to counter tear gas. No Arab faced tear gas before. They were asking Palestinians what to do, the onion, the covering, the mask covering the faces. Everything came out of the Palestinian Intifada.
But remember, we said at the start of the lecture that a lot of people see the Palestinian situation as the precedent to all of this, like through the use of public space, youth resistance, actual armed struggle, all of this or how to organize around certain issues. I think the first Intifada was really important in this idea of vertical organization around a specific social justice or political justice issue. And I think Palestine was really, really quite important in giving this kind of, first of all, the inspiration. And obviously we can't forget like all the Palestinian flags, etc. And the centrality of the Palestine issue to every single one of these demonstrations. I mean, they made sure not to forget it. And now we'll see what happened. Well, so this is another image. And what does this mean? I mean, if we were to look at the signifiers in this and like think about...
It means the awareness of the Egyptian people toward how to deal with the army, because if any simple fight happened with the army,
exactly,
things will go worse, even worse than what is it now.
Exactly.
They were fully aware of this, and they respect the army, and the army is something away from the regime.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, yeah. Somehow. Huh? Yeah. يعني
Why do people together?
But he's angry. He doesn't think so. He's grumpy. She's attacking him. She's telling him, "Don't kill my children." And this one, what did this do? This image. This was a very like kind of. It disrupted our imagination, or it disrupted our organized lives in so many different ways. What did it do? Like, I know it triggered a lot of artwork, it triggered a lot of debate, it triggered a lot of anger. هاي مسة.
And I hear a report about that, and there were two parts, and one part is asking and negotiating why she dressed this thing without anything, without
underneath
any t-shirt and anything else. And the other, he said, even if she dressed that with nothing down, but it's her right.
Exactly.
And what's happened here is like this army, they attack her and they do that for her. Doesn't matter what she dress.
This is interesting because I remember reading somewhere that, you know, Egypt, like Palestine, like Jordan, like Lebanon, it's received so much aid, international aid, funding for NGOs to work on specific issues, whether gender, culture, production, arts, micromanagement, micro credit programs, all of this stuff to, you know, to get them to develop socially and economically. And in one instance, this image did, or in terms of like, in terms of triggering our imaginations and our mental capacity to understand what gender is all about in a second. And it did what NGOs have been trying to do for years in many ways. It did not?
It didn't.
Why?
Because there's no, the situation didn't change since the NGOs start working. It just courses, trainings, and a lot of
Even get worse.
But change.
getting worse.
Okay. Someone else's comment? Okay.
It didn't change the mentality of the people.
But do you think like the whole idea, this idea what we're talking about, like reclaiming the public space? Okay, people reclaim the public space, but look at what happened in the elections in Egypt, right? Like, change is incremental. It happens over time. It's never going to be something that happens like this. Like, I mean, the Palestinians, we know this more than anyone else. Like, it is incremental, and armed struggle or any kind of struggle takes place every day on a very personal level and also on a very collective level. So the fact that this happened, and in some sense it did disrupt what our imagination of a woman's role in society is, doesn't necessarily translate into women all going out to vote the next day. This is not how it works. But to say that it's a failure or that it wasn't as effective, I don't know. I mean, this is arguable, but it generated debate that NGOs weren't able to do, not the same kind of debate about the women's role in political activism, for instance.
Yeah, but the women was in a role in the first Intifada, and
yes, I agree.
These
I agree.
NGOs.
I agree.
So it was participating in this.
Yeah.
Without NGOs, without these silly courses and training.
Yeah. Yeah, but
So
this
what?
is not silly courses and training.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
know.
whole.
That's
The perception
the
also the perception of the image, whether it was their NGOs or not, for us as Palestinians, as Arabs, it is the same perception, whether before NGOs or after NGOs.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
You know, it's such an image of humiliation and
Yeah.
looking how they're treating the woman. The perception and how we will look at it is similar. Whether, like, why would NGOs be included in the discussion of how this image should be looked like?
I see what you mean. Okay.
Look, I think that this image was widely, if you read next morning the local magazines and the newspapers in Egypt, most of the community were against what was happening, not because she was a lady. Some of it was because she's a lady, and you know, it's in our culture, it's wrong to undress a lady like this or treat a lady like this in any way or form. But also treating a human being like that, beating a fellow human being down on the ground and get them naked from too much pulling around. That was also a lot of people were speaking against that. And actually, I think this is the incidents, and another incident when people were showered by chemical water and tear gas while they were praying on the bridge in the Kubri. I think these two images what brought Hosni Mubarak down. Because any claims of equality and that no, we are not killing, we are not doing, they are the ones who are violent, those images broke things down once they got out. And I think people were looking at it this way instead of like being social. And again, I'm with Qusay with why do we need foreign NGOs or local NGOs to tell us what to think? Everyone is against that.
Yeah.
Every decent youth who is being oppressed by any regime will be against that, not because she's a woman, from the fact that she is a youth like me.
Yeah.
And that could happen to me at some point.
Exactly.
Both of these pictures, to me, as looking at them from an outsider, really reveal the brutality of the police force, of the military, and especially the one before, the image of the mother kissing the soldier. I see a humiliation, like power of her humiliating the soldier. I mean, just as an outsider, if I'm reading this image of seeing that, it's almost as if she's saying, I understand why you're brutal, you lack love. And that's a humiliating message to someone who holds power, who holds guns, to like pat them on the back, as if they're a small child and say, I understand. You know,
She's almost saying you're the victim.
Yeah.
It's like how sometimes like Palestinians deal with Israelis. We look at soldiers and say, you pathetic thing.
No, this is not real.
You're so sad.
This is like, you know, this is like the people, how the Egyptians, how they look to the Egyptian army. It's not humiliating. It's like you can explain it the way you want, but like I do have respect for the Egyptian army. How about the Egyptians themselves? Egyptians knows what the Egyptian army have done for them. For several
Yani, this is a big debate about the Egyptian army. Like there's some people, like you said, who are really convinced that the Egyptian army is central to their society. It represents authority, it represents organization, it represents order. And so people are afraid.
It represents because this mother, her son was in the army at some point, and she knows what is the army. So
Yani I just want to go back to what we began with, the idea of the political and reclaiming the political and everyday politics. Like how the two are connected, that we practice everyday politics, not just we practice everyday politics informally. Politics does not just belong in state structures and bureaucracies and institutions. We're doing politics every single day when we disrupt the organized order that's been passed down to us. One of the examples is this book here that we tried to look at and we tried to kind of analyze, is this idea of Palestine that we all seem to have, or is used to represent us, we're disrupting this. We're saying, no, this is the idea of Palestine that we have. And it can be a subjective understanding, of course. And this doesn't mean that because it's subjective, it won't lead to organized political movement. It is about empowerment, essentially. This is what it's about. It's about understanding yourself, like, is that from inside, and then how this eventually leads to mobilization and the kind of addressing of power and reversal of power in some instances. And we looked at all the examples that did that. Yeah.